It started as nothing more than a flicker, an anomaly in a deep space sensor array anchored to the outer hull of Watch Station Kolzar, nestled along the fringes of the Calthera Veil. At first, the data was dismissed. A phantom blip, a glitch in the spectral array. Imperial systems were infamous for false positives in regions where cosmic radiation surged like tides. But then the flicker became a pulse, and the pulse became a roar. Within minutes, every early warning system across 3 sectors began feeding telemetry into the Nexus core. An object of massive displacement was crossing into Imperial territory, slow, methodical, and unbothered by the thousands of eyes now turning toward it. Commander Valor Sin of the 17th Imperial Watch Fleet stood on the elevated dais of the main bridge, his primary and secondary ocular lenses narrowing in irritation. His voice echoed through the vaulted command chamber, each syllable dripping with disdain. "One ship? You summon me for one ship?" But the data scrolling across the command interfaces told a different story. This wasn't just a ship. This was a fortress, mobile, shielded, and radiating energy signatures that exceeded Class Phi thresholds. The scans showed hull mass approaching that of a mining colony. Its outer skin was composed of exotic alloys the Empire had never catalogued, and worst of all, it carried no known Imperial transponder code, no diplomacy, no announcement, just a name that burned through the encryption like a ghostly whisper from the dead. Resolute. The name hit the veterans of the command staff like a thunderclap. There were rumors, of course, stories exchanged over black market networks, and salvager frequencies, tales of ancient Earth warships built for extinction-level engagements. But those were myths, whispers in the dark. Humanity had perished a century ago. The collapse virus had shattered their communications, their AI, command networks, their unity. The Terran systems fell into chaos, torn apart by internal wars and external opportunists. The Nithari Empire had observed from afar, their spy masters nodding approvingly as mankind burned itself into cosmic irrelevance. No Terran vessel had been spotted in nearly 90 years. The last recorded signal from Earth had been a distress beacon, followed by silence. And yet, here it was, a Terran ship, alone, undeterred, penetrating deeper into sovereign Nithari space with every passing second. Imagine watching that monitor flicker as a name long buried in history suddenly came alive again, defiant, uninvited, and impossible to ignore. What would go through your mind, knowing that something presumed extinct was now approaching your empire's doorstep with impossible calm? From the nerve center of Watchfleet Command, orders flowed like electricity. Imperial patrols were dispatched. Scout drones zipped toward the incoming vessel, their feeds transmitting high-definition visuals back to the primary analysis node. What the analysts saw left them speechless. The ship was unlike anything recorded in known galactic archives. It had no traditional propulsion emitters. It didn't use quantum sails or gravimetric drives. Instead, it moved as though reality itself was making room for its passage, bending subtly around its angular obsidian form. A single seam ran along the spine of the vessel, glowing faintly blue, as if hiding something vast beneath the hull. Before we jump into this epic tale, subscribe to HFY Chronicles for the most intense sci-fi battles, legendary warriors, and universe-shaking wars. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join the fight. Within the Resolute, silence reigned not out of fear, but focus. Captain Alaric Drylus, a man whose bloodline traced back to the first lunar colonists, stood at the heart of the navigation sphere, his gloved fingers brushing across strands of holographic projection. His face bore the weight of history, scars that hinted at battles fought not just across space, but across time and truth. He wasn't here to negotiate. He wasn't here to warn. He was here to remember. Because humanity had never truly died. They had simply gone dark. The collapse had not broken Earth. It had hidden it. In the aftermath of the fall, a remnant of the old Terran command structure, Project Veil, had gone underground, activating deep space vaults and black sites buried across the scattered colonies. With AI guardians deactivated and all known human strongholds compromised, the surviving architects of the Terran military retreated into silence, waging a new kind of war, one of reformation, reinvention, and waiting. For 100 years, the galaxy forgot them. And in that silence, humanity did what it had always done best: adapt. And now, the product of that century-long metamorphosis was en route to the beating heart of the very empire that had once bet on their extinction. 17 hours to engagement range with Kazakh Prime, the ship's AI, Ion 9, intoned. Its voice, synthetic yet eerily calm, carried a weight of gravitas that belied its origins. Enemy grid defenses activating. We are being painted by 132 weapons platforms. Alaric's expression didn't change. No evasive action, he said simply. Let them watch. The crew didn't question him. Every officer aboard the Resolute had been born into this mission, trained from childhood in the simulacra of lost Terran strongholds, fed a history cleansed of Imperial propaganda. They were warriors raised not for conquest, but for proof. For a declaration to the galaxy, humanity remembers. Meanwhile, back at Kazakh Prime, chaos bloomed like wildfire. Archon Zel, a senior official of the Imperial High Nexus, stared at the feed in abject disbelief. One vessel, he muttered. And yet it comes without fear, without fleet support, without allies. He turned to his command board, where intelligence analysts scrambled to update their databases. What do we know of this Resolute? A junior tactician stammered out a response. Sir, the vessel's mass indicates a dreadnought-class platform, possibly autonomous. The last reference to a ship by that name is from Terran archives. Classified Level Omega. Records state it was decommissioned. No images, no schematics, nothing concrete. The Archon's gaze turned cold. Then, this isn't just provocation. This is a test, and we will not be tested by ghosts. Fleet Group 9 was mobilized within 45 minutes. 17 Imperial cruisers, 2 battleships and a dread carrier lit their engines and made a direct vector intercept. The order was clear. Destroy the unidentified vessel. Send a message to any other remnant that might believe it can trespass into the Empire's dominion. For the Nithari had ruled the Galactic East for over 7 centuries. They had crushed rebellions, enslaved worlds, and rewritten history in their favor. But this time, they weren't facing a rebellion. They were facing a return. And somewhere in the shadow of deep space, behind ancient hull and quiet defiance, a Terran warship prepared to speak for the first time in a century. The stars shimmered like indifferent witnesses as Fleet Group 9 surged through the void. 17 Imperial cruisers forming a predatory arc, flanked by 2 gleaming dreadnoughts that bristled with neutron lances and Sun-Core torpedo arrays. The dread carrier, Veltraxis, sat at the rear of the formation like a brooding giant, its hangar bays pulsing with the eerie blue glow of combat drones preparing for launch. Orders had been given with mechanical precision. Identify the rogue vessel, issue a single formal demand for surrender, and if unheeded, eliminate it. The Nithari did not tolerate defiance, and they certainly didn't tolerate ghosts from extinct species crossing their borders with impunity. But there was something different about this confrontation. Veteran Fleetmaster Kao Tharun of the dreadnought Morgai's Honor had been in more than 40 campaigns, had crushed rebellions on fringe moons and obliterated asteroid fortresses held by rogue AI enclaves. Yet this felt wrong. Not just tactically, but philosophically. Every maneuver the foreign vessel made was deliberate, precise, calculated to provoke reaction without offering aggression. It was not a suicide run. It was not a mistake. The vessel had chosen this path, had crossed parsecs of hostile space alone, and now faced down an entire battle group without flinching. Aboard the Resolute, silence persisted. But it was the silence of preparation, not hesitation. In the central strategy well, Captain Alaric Drylus studied the incoming formation with a soldier's gaze and a historian's memory. The Nithari ships moved like predators, yes, but predators conditioned by generations of unchecked dominance. Their formations were textbook perfect. Their approach was intimidating, but they were creatures of doctrine, predictable, confident in the myth of their superiority. Ion 9, Alaric said, his voice level. What's the likelihood they'll open with full-force engagement? The AI's voice emerged in a tone that would have sent chills down the spine of anyone who had fought Terran cyber warfare systems before. 78%. They do not believe you are real. Alaric didn't smile. He nodded. Good. Prepare the reveal. And then space changed. The Resolute, which had appeared as a monolithic dagger adrift in space, shifted. Seam lines along its hull, once invisible to all but the most advanced scanners, snapped open in synchronized precision. Gleaming silver-blue conduits emerged, humming with antimatter containment coils. An ancient war symbol, the sigil of the Unified Terran Defense Command, blazed across its side in defiance of time, history, and imperial propaganda. And then came the worst revelation for the Nithari Command. The Resolute was not alone. One by one, sensor echoes materialized from seemingly empty space, each a gravitational anomaly shaped like a vessel, previously cloaked by distortion fields so advanced the Empire hadn't even theorized their design. 5 ships in total. Not as large as the Resolute, but each one a marvel of Terran engineering, designed for asymmetric warfare, fleet disruption, and cybernetic dominance. Their surfaces bore no visible weapons, no markings, no visible exhaust. They simply appeared. In the bridge of the Morgai's honor, alarms howled. Kael Tharun barked for recalibrated scans, thinking his fleet had stumbled into a stealth flotilla. "What are they?" he shouted. "Cloaked escorts? Quantum ghosts?" The tactical officer, barely 23 solar cycles into service, whispered, the answer with wide eyes. "No, sir. They weren't cloaked. They just weren't here a moment ago." Impossible. But the data said otherwise. Each ship had mass signatures, power cores, and gravitational wakes, but none had been recorded until just now. It was as if reality itself had been rewritten. Back on the Resolute, Ion 9 began its directive. All systems optimal. Quantum interlink. Grid active. Sub-reality broadcast initialized. "Would you like to say the words, Captain?" Alaric stared ahead, at a fleet of ships that had forgotten what fear was, forgotten what it meant to challenge Earth. "Yes," he said. "Play the recording." Across every Imperial ship, communication systems shrieked into static as an unauthorized frequency overrode secure channels. The voice that followed wasn't artificial. It was distinctly human, weathered, resolute, and ancient in its gravitas. It was a voice the galaxy hadn't heard in over a century. A voice recorded at the fall of Terran Command, meant only to be played at the return. To those who remember us as myths, let this transmission be memory. To those who wrote our extinction, into your archives let this be correction. We are Terran. We have returned. We do not seek your permission. We do not require your understanding. We are the consequence you forgot to fear. In the void that followed, nothing moved. The Resolute remained still. The escort ships, each now triangulated and actively monitoring every Imperial vessel, held position like sentinels of some ancient god. And yet, they had not fired, not launched, not even powered their weapons, because this was not a battle. This was a message, and the Nithari Command knew it. Within the Imperial Nexus, chaos reigned. High Archons debated whether to escalate the confrontation or open communication. Civilian networks were experiencing cascading rumor floods. Already, whispers spread like wildfire. Humans had survived. Humans had returned. And they brought with them ships that could rewrite physics. 1,000 years of Imperial supremacy, of unchallenged expansion and forced assimilation, now hung in the balance. Not because of an armada, but because of a memory brought to life. A singular truth walking through the front door of empire. The psychological blow struck deeper than any cannon. The Terrans hadn't attacked. They hadn't even maneuvered aggressively. Their strategy was perfect. Remind the galaxy not of war, but of fear. The fear that humanity had always invoked, not through numbers, but through will. Through the knowledge that when pushed to the edge of extinction, humans didn't vanish. They evolved. Captain Alaric knew the next move would define everything. He wasn't here to destroy Fleet Group 9, not yet. He was here to provoke the Nithari High Command into a decision. Would they bow and acknowledge what they once buried? Or would they unleash war on a species that had mastered silence as a weapon? As he gazed at the frozen fleet before him, He felt the weight of every generation that had fought to keep humanity alive, fought in bunkers, hidden labs, asteroid redoubts, and quantum shadows. Their sacrifices had led to this moment. And now, it was the Nethari's turn to choose. Because Earth had never needed an empire. It had only ever needed a reason. The decision came not from Fleet Group 9, but from the far reaches of the Imperial core, where glass towers pierced the clouds of the capital moon, and the Nethari High Council convened an emergency session beneath the obsidian dome. The holographic likenesses of sector commanders and intelligence prefects flickered across the central chamber, their forms jittering with urgency and confusion. The declaration from the Terran ship had already reached every major data relay in the core worlds. It wasn't just a transmission, it was a paradigm collapse, a crack in the polished lie the Empire had told for generations. Humans are extinct, Archon Veridon hissed, his golden robe trailing sparks of defensive nanoweave as he stepped forward. They were erased in the Purge Wars. Their last world turned to glass. The records are immutable. But Admiral Secor of the Outer Reach stared into the projection of the Resolute, rotating slowly in front of him. And yet, he said, voice slow and measured, that ship bears Terran architecture, the materials, unregistered, the propulsion signatures, non-standard, the AI on board, autonomous, sentient, and most damning of all, we were never able to replicate human full-stack AI. Not truly. This isn't a ghost. It's them. Veridon's face twisted. Impossible. We annihilated them. You annihilated what you could see, Secor said, and that single line sent ripples through the room. The truth was undeniable. The Terrans hadn't just survived. They had outgrown the game board entirely. While the Empire had been consolidating power, bending species to its will with cultural sterilization and resource embargoes, the humans had vanished like mist into the vacuum. And now they were back, not as rebels, but as revenants. Purposeful, methodical, and entirely self-assured. Meanwhile, in the cold theater of space, the Resolute remained unmoving. Around it, the 5 Terran escorts maintained perfect spatial symmetry, each one silently adjusting its orientation to maintain optimal defensive fields. No energy spikes, no sudden maneuvers, just silent pressure, a presence so calm and composed, it felt more terrifying than an open barrage. Fleetmaster Kale Tharoon's orders were clear. Hold formation, do not engage unless fired upon. But that didn't ease the tension simmering across the fleet. Every ship's crew was locked into full combat readiness. Drones were swarming in layered interception rings. Point defense systems tracked the smallest pieces of debris. And still, the Terrans offered no provocation. On the Morgai's honor, Kale opened a secure line to his lead analyst. What's their play? The analyst paused. Sir, they're playing a different game. Look at their positioning. Look at the way they waited to reveal themselves. This is information warfare, not ship-to-ship combat. They're studying us, measuring reactions, testing psychological fault lines. And they're winning. Kale leaned back, eyes narrowing. That word again, winning. And yet, they hadn't fired a single shot. Back aboard the Resolute, Alaric stood in his command well, watching the projected analytics stream generated by Ion 9. Charts, response latency logs, fleet signature mappings, and emotional gradient. Overlays of the Nethari crews, they all told the same story. Fear, not panic, not terror, but the cold, invasive fear that came when an opponent revealed themselves to be so far ahead that even understanding their tactics felt like arrogance. We're in their minds now, Alaric said softly. They'll scramble for control, escalate, or retreat. Either one serves us. Ion 9 replied, Do you wish to maintain psychological dominance? Alaric considered. No. Now we shift the weight. On cue, the Resolute pulsed. Not visually, but gravitationally. A controlled emission of its quantum gravity core. A ripple in local space-time that only ships with precise instrumentation could detect. The Nethari had that instrumentation. And what they saw horrified them. The Terran warship was running on a system they hadn't catalogued. Not a singularity drive. Not fold stream fusion. It was something else. Something that manipulated gravitational constants in real time. A system that could, if weaponized, render inertial dampeners obsolete. That single pulse was not an attack. It was a thesis. And its title was, "We have evolved beyond you." Within minutes, the data leaked. Despite encryption efforts, Fringe World relay stations picked up the gravity echo and began circulating the phenomenon. Rogue academics, once dismissed for their obsessions with Terran relics, began screaming across the net channels. "They're using dark harmonics. Stabilized. We theorized it, but they built it." Back in the capital, Archon Veridon was silenced. Not by argument, but by mathematics. Raw data from the Resolute's pulse was undeniable. Terran physics had diverged centuries ago. While the Empire had hunted primitive dissidents and perfected economic control, Earth's children had rewritten the rules of motion, energy, and information. They had become a civilization whose weapons were ideas, and whose presence could destabilize the very structure of galactic order. "Open negotiations," said Admiral Secor at last, his voice grim. "Before this turns from fear to inspiration. If their message spreads, systems will defect before a shot is ever fired." Back on the Resolute, Ion 9 chimed again. "Incoming signal from Fleet Group 9. Encrypted, formal request for dialogue." Alaric nodded once. "Prepare the channel. Let them speak first." And so it began. The war had not started with fire, but with truth. Truth that had been buried under centuries of imperial arrogance. Truth that now floated in orbit, undeniable and real, in the form of a ship that was both monument and miracle. The Resolute had not come to conquer. It had come to awaken, and the galaxy, blinking in disbelief, had no choice but to listen. The signal had been received. The silence that followed was more telling than any communication ever could be. In the heart of the Resolute, Alaric sat at the helm, his eyes focused on the blipping patterns of data as they cascaded across the hollow table. His hand hovered over the activation interface, poised to initiate a protocol that could shift the trajectory of galactic history. The request for dialogue wasn't just a formality. It was a test. A response would demand careful negotiation, but it would also carry weight. Unspoken threats, underlying promises, and the long shadow of what would happen if the Terrans were dismissed again. On the opposite side of the communication link, Admiral Sekor's face appeared, composed but with the faintest edge of weariness lining his features. His eyes, however, were sharp, piercing through the intergalactic space that separated them. "I will make this brief, Captain Alaric. The Empire has no need to be reminded of the past. We have evolved. Our strength, our technology, our reach. We are the future." Alaric didn't flinch. That was true. "Once," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "But history doesn't forget what's buried beneath the surface. And you've just uncovered it." Sekor's lip curled in the slightest hint of a smirk. He was playing a game of his own, attempting to regain some measure of control, to assert the Empire's dominance with carefully measured words. But Alaric was not intimidated. He wasn't here to reclaim old grudges. He was here to rewrite the rules. The Terran captain leaned forward, focusing his gaze on Sekor's projection. "You're right, Admiral," Alaric said, his tone shifting, now more authoritative. "We were erased from your records, but not from existence. We didn't come to invade, but to remind you of the one thing you've forgotten. Your empire was built on the bones of civilizations that were erased for daring to challenge you." Sekor's composure faltered for just a moment. His eyes narrowed. The truth behind Alaric's words cut deeper than any weapon could. The Empire had expanded by force, silencing the voices of any species that dared to resist, weaving a web of dominance that stretched across star systems. But in doing so, they had silenced the one voice that had once posed a true challenge: humanity. "Enough with the past," Sekor said, trying to regain control. "The future is where we stand now. Captain, you can't change that. We have the firepower to erase any threat you pose in an instant. We are the mightiest force in the galaxy." Alaric smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile full of a quiet understanding. "You think firepower matters?" he asked. "Let me show you what it means to be truly unstoppable." With a single command, Alaric initiated the first of many protocols. Small, seemingly inconsequential actions, but each one building the pressure of a trap that would soon be sprung. The fleet, quietly waiting in formation behind the Resolute, began to pulse with the subtle energy of Terran technology, each ship emitting faint gravitational ripples that would distort space itself. To the Nithari, it would be impossible to notice at first, just an anomaly in the stars. But it was the first strike in a war of nerves, a message wrapped in the very fabric of reality. "We don't need your weapons," Alaric said, his tone now dead serious. "We've outgrown them, and when you see what's coming, you'll understand why you should have feared us long ago." On the Empire's flagship, the Tarnath, Fleetmaster Kale Tharoon stared at the readings flooding in. The gravitational anomaly, whatever it was, had begun to spread in small waves across the fleet. It wasn't a weapon, per se, but it was something far more dangerous. An unpredictable force, one that shifted the very principles of physics they had relied on for centuries. "Admiral," Kale's voice was tight with concern, "we've never seen anything like this. They're manipulating gravity fields over vast distances. If they continue, it could cause a cascade effect in the local star system's trajectory. The entire region may be destabilized." Sekor's eyes darted nervously to the side. "What are they playing at? This isn't a battle. They're experimenting, testing us. We can't let them get away with this." But as Sekor spoke, Alaric's voice rang out across the comm once again, cutting through the tension. "This is your final warning," he said, his voice calm but heavy with intent. "The Resolute holds nothing but the future of the galaxy. You can try to fight us, but you will find the rules have changed. You cannot win this battle. Not by force, not by technology, not by anything you think you know." And then, just as the final sentence left his lips, the gravity pulse intensified. Not just in localized pockets, but across the entire system. The stars above flickered, responding to the subtle but incredibly potent fluctuations now swirling in the fabric of space. It was a warning, a declaration of Terran technological supremacy. The Empire was no longer the undisputed power. The galaxy, for the first time in centuries, had a new force to reckon with. As the pulse continued to resonate, a ripple effect spread across the entire fleet. Systems began to flicker in and out of stability. Navigational protocols clashed with the unpredictable distortions, causing once stable systems to crash. The Nithari warships, bristling with powerful weaponry, now found themselves helpless in the face of an intangible force. Gravity, the one constant they thought they could control, had turned against them. Across the comm line, Sekor's voice faltered. "You've done it. You've—" Alaric cut him off. "We haven't even started." And as the gravity waves pulsed, the Empire's formidable warships found themselves helpless before the very thing they had always taken for granted. The laws of the universe, altered by the quiet, unassuming power of humanity. A single ship had crossed into Imperial territory, and in doing so, had become the herald of an entirely new era. A shift had begun, whether the Empire liked it or not. As the Resolute stood alone amidst the swirling chaos of Imperial forces, the eerie quiet of space felt heavy, suffused with the weight of what had just transpired. Alaric stood motionless at the helm, his gaze locked on the stars beyond, as if listening to the resonance of the universe itself, the gravitational pulses still reverberating through the galaxy like a distant heartbeat. His hands rested lightly on the controls, but the calmness was deceptive. Beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. In the command center, his officers moved with purpose, their eyes fixed on the displays that showed the after effects of the gravity pulses still wreaking havoc on the Imperial fleet. The once pristine formations of Nithari warships were now fragmented, their advanced weaponry rendered useless by the unpredictable distortions in space. It wasn't just their technology that had failed. It was their confidence, their superiority, that had shattered in the face of an unknown force. The Empire had prided itself on its technological might, but that power now seemed fragile and vulnerable. They were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy. They were a species fighting to hold on to their place in a universe that was no longer as they had once known it. Alaric's voice broke the silence, quiet but resolute. "Initiate final sequence." The order was simple, but its implications were vast. The Resolute was ready to move from defense to offense, not just in terms of weaponry, but in terms of ideology. It was time to strike, not with firepower, but with the full might of a revolution that had been waiting for centuries to make its mark. Back on the Nithari flagship, Admiral Sycor's face twisted with frustration and disbelief. He was no longer the unshakable leader of the Empire. He was a man cornered by forces he did not understand. His once proud fleet, now battered and disoriented, struggled to regain its composure. But it wasn't just the technology that had failed. The very core of the Empire was shaking, its foundation cracked by the appearance of the Resolute. The myth of Nithari invincibility had been shattered by one human warship, by the single undeniable truth that the universe was no longer ruled by the old powers. The Nithari were not the future of the galaxy. They were a relic, destined to fade in the shadow of humanity's return. "Captain," one of Sycor's subordinates called from across the room, panic creeping into his voice. "The gravitational anomalies, they're spreading. We can't stabilize them. We can't counteract the fluctuations. Our engines—" Sykor didn't need to hear the rest. He knew the truth. The Empire had been bested, not by firepower, not by fleets of ships, but by the unpredictable brilliance of a species that had learned to bend the very fabric of the cosmos to their will. And as Sycor's gaze drifted toward the Resolute, the realization hit him like a physical blow. They had underestimated humanity. "Prepare for retreat," Sykor finally ordered, his voice laced with frustration and fear. "We'll need to regroup. There's no way we can win this without reinforcements." But as the Empire began to pull back, one thought kept circling in the minds of the Nithari leadership. This was not the end. The Resolute had opened a door that could never be closed. The Terran Empire had arrived, not with an army, but with a single ship that had irrevocably altered the balance of power. The Nithari had seen their technology fail, and they had seen their arrogance crumble. They had learned that in the vastness of the cosmos, no species could afford to grow complacent. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had returned not just as survivors, but as a force to be reckoned with. On board the Resolute, Alaric stood in the center of the bridge, watching as the Nithari fleet began to scatter like startled prey. His expression was stoic, but inside, a quiet storm was brewing. This victory was not just a triumph of technology, it was a triumph of humanity itself. For too long, they had been underestimated. For too long, they had been exiled and ignored. But now, the galaxy knew their name. Humanity was no longer the underdog. It was the force that would reshape the future. "We've done it," Alaric murmured, almost to himself. "Not yet," came the voice of his second-in-command, Lieutenant Sierra, who stood by his side. Her eyes were fixed on the holo-display, scanning the debris left in the wake of the Nithari retreat. "The Empire is powerful. This may have been a battle, but the war is just beginning." Alaric nodded, his gaze now turning toward the stars beyond the Resolute's viewport. The battle was over, but the conflict was far from finished. This was a turning point, a moment in history that would ripple out into the future. The Empire had been rattled, its hold on the galaxy loosened, but it still existed. It was a force that could rally, regroup, and return with even more devastating power. But humanity was no longer a forgotten memory. The Resolute had proven that. The galaxy now knew what they were capable of. And in that moment, Alaric realized the full weight of what they had done. The battle had been won, but the true fight had only just begun. The Resolute had crossed into Imperial territory, not just to make a statement, but to set the stage for an era of change. Humanity's return was not a fleeting moment. It was a harbinger of a new age. An age where the old powers would no longer reign unchallenged. An age where the future was shaped not by empires of old, but by the relentless, unyielding spirit of humanity. And as the Resolute drifted into the void, its engines roaring with the promise of battles yet to come, one thing was clear. The Empire was no longer the galaxy's greatest power. The question was no longer if humanity would rise to challenge them, but when the stars would burn with the fury of that inevitable reckoning.